So we are looking at learning theories. There are three major theories I want to focus on for this week. The classical conditioning is the first one. Let's get started by looking back at early 1900s. Ivan Pavlov and John Watson are the theorists you have to remember in conjunction to the first theory called the classical conditioning. Pavlov was working on a research that focused on studying salivation of dogs in his laboratory. So it kind of looked like this. So what Pavlov wanted to do was measure salivation from the dog as food was introduced to the mouth of the dog. So he was trying to do something else, and he noticed something interesting in his research, which was more like a serendipity because that is not what he was looking for. He noticed something. The dogs in his laboratory started salivating or having the response with stimulus other than just food. So he found that stimulus that causes response, which is supposed to be the food, in this case the meat powder causing salivation in dog, beyond this the dog learned to do something more than just this. So what Pavlov found was the process called conditioning. The dog was learning to form association between a meaningful stimulus and a non-meaningful stimulus. So what does that mean in terms of the experiment that he was trying to do? So let's take the example of just salivation as a result of food, which is classical conditioning, the unconditioned stimulus. Let's just notice this part of the slide. In Pavlov's study, food caused salivation, right? It's more like a natural process. It's a reflex. So it's a reflex very similar to that of when a puff of air is aimed towards your eye. What is the reflex reaction there? The response for you would be blink of your eye, right? Your eye blink. So that is very similar to this. It's like looking at lime or lemon, we start salivating. So the same concept. So this does make sense, and this also makes sense that when you just ring a bell or make a sound using a device, there is no response, as in there's no salivation that happens on the dog. So this is before any conditioning or learning could take place. So what actually the dog, according to Pavlov, ended up doing was dog ended up having to make an association between the sound and the food. So because every time Pavlov would create the sound, he would give food right after the sound. So the dog started associating or linking these two together, and then happened the salivation, which was the response. So this is during the dog's learning process. So when did we know that the dog had learned what we were aiming to get to? Is when the dog started salivating right after hearing the sound, even before the food could be in the dog's sight or the smell. Even before the food was introduced, the dog started having the response of salivation. In this case, the neutral stimulus, which is the sound, becomes the new learned stimulus, which is the conditioned stimulus, and the reaction that was initially not there becomes a conditioned response. So this is the bottom line of how the new learning has taken place. Now, you may be wondering, now this is to do with dogs, and what does it mean for me as a human? Well, a lot of behavioral researchers worked with animals, but they found that we humans are not very different from animals. And we also have similar responses. If you look at the modern day example here that I have for you, you see we also have responses very similar to that, even by the sight of a box, that usually contains pizza, just looking at the box might cause you to have a particular reaction or response. So now this neutral stimulus, just a cardboard box, it does not just become any other box, but it becomes a box which causes you to feel the need of having pizza. So this is a way in which a conditioned behavior occurred. But there was another psychologist right at that time who wondered, okay, we can condition responses or behavior, but can we condition people's emotional responses? So John Watson, after Pavlov, was another psychologist who experimented to find association principle in emotions. Let's do this. If you pause the video and click on this link, I will have this link available to you. So if you click on this, you'll be able to look at the actual experiment and learn a little bit more about what Watson did with this baby here called Little Albert. All right, well, you can do that and then get back to the video right after you watch the video. Good. Okay. Now that you've watched, you will see that it's easier for humans to form association between something that earlier did not cause any fear response. Watson was able to form that response in little Albert by creating that fear as he paired it with a loud noise. So every time the rat came in, or anything even similar to that, because of generalization, anything similar to the rat also elicited the same kind of response, which was fear. So this tells us that you can condition emotions, different types, like liking someone, or even love, or phobia, or prejudice and dislike. So this is one of the reasons why you enter a restaurant and you feel like you feel very happy automatically, and you wonder why, and then you remember last time you came, or years ago you came to that place with someone you'd really enjoy being with. So we definitely can work with phobia, for example, because it's a conditioned response or a new learned response. So that's why psychologists are able to work and treat phobia. And the same principle applies to our everyday life in terms of treatment for any kind of addiction. When you compare it with something unpleasant, and that is what you learn, and you feel that way, and you stop smoking or drinking or taking drugs because of the association you form. This can be applied to both why we learn to get addicted in the first place, of associating it with something pleasurable, and if we need to work reverse to take it off from us to learn a new behavior, you get to do something like this too. So I do have 4 scenarios for you where I want you to explore a little bit more after you finish watching this video. Explore and identify what is a neutral stimulus, unconditioned stimulus, and unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus and conditioned response in all of these examples. All right, see you in the next video on operant conditioning.